Welcome to the Economy of Nations, the podcast where history's greatest empires come alive. Join us as we uncover how nations built their wealth, shaped the world, and left legacies that still influence our lives today. Imagine standing on the deck of a wooden sailing ship in the year 1577. The salty air stings your face, the waves rise and fall beneath your feet, and on the horizon stretches the unknown. England is still a relatively small kingdom compared to the mighty Spain or Portugal. But in this moment, something is changing. A world of opportunity is opening, and with it, the seeds of an empire are about to be planted. Have you ever wondered how a small island, often cold and rainy, came to dominate so much of the earth? That is our story today. The rise, the glory, and the decline of the British Empire, the richest empire in history. Think about England in the 1500s. It wasn't particularly powerful. Its land was limited, its population smaller than rivals, and it didn't have the gold or silver pouring in from the New World like Spain did. So how did it compete? The answer was partly daring, partly desperation, and partly luck. Adventurers like Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh set out on dangerous voyages, sometimes sanctioned by the crown, sometimes little more than pirates with a blessing. They raided Spanish ships, explored new coasts, and brought back tales of riches overseas. Queen Elizabeth encouraged this. The sea was England's path to survival, and soon it would become its path to greatness. Now imagine being a merchant in London in 1600. The city is noisy, bustling, and filled with smells both pleasant and foul. You've heard of a new company forming, a bold venture called the East India Company. A group of merchants have received a charter from the Queen to trade directly with Asia, bypassing middlemen. They are risking everything, ships, fortunes, sometimes even lives, for the chance to bring back spices, silks, and treasures from the far side of the world. Can you feel the gamble? This wasn't a sure thing. Ships might never return. Crews could die from disease or storms. But if they succeeded, the profits would be enormous. And succeed they did. The East India Company grew into something far larger than a business. It became almost a state within a state, with its own soldiers, its own forts, and eventually its own role in governing vast territories. From India came cotton and tea, from China came porcelain and silks, from the Caribbean came sugar. Sugar, in particular, was addictive. Europeans developed an insatiable appetite for sweet things, and sugar plantations in the Caribbean poured wealth into Britain. But there is a darker truth here as well. Much of this prosperity was built on the brutal foundation of slavery. Ships carried manufactured goods to Africa, enslaved people across the Atlantic to the Americas, and raw materials back to Britain. This triangular system of trade was immensely profitable, but unimaginably cruel. It is one of the most painful chapters in the empire's economic story. Now pause for a moment and imagine the streets of London in the 1700s. Cafes are opening, where men gather to drink tea and coffee, products of empire. Newspapers spread news from across the world, much of it about trade. Ships are constantly arriving and departing along the Thames, filled with goods from every continent. The empire is becoming more than just colonies. It is becoming an interconnected network of commerce. You could almost say that globalization, as we know it today, was born in these centuries of trade. But trade alone didn't make Britain the richest empire. Something else was about to give it a decisive edge. Let me ask you this. When you think of revolutions, do you imagine battles and armies? In this case, the revolution that mattered most was one of coal, iron, and steam. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the late 18th century, and it changed everything. Picture a textile mill in Manchester around 1800. The air is thick with cotton fibers, the noise of machines is deafening, and child workers dart between the massive looms. It's harsh, it's exhausting, but it's revolutionary. Machines powered by steam are weaving cloth faster than hundreds of people ever could by hand. Coal mines fuel furnaces, ironworks create rails and bridges, and soon trains and steamships are shrinking the world. Britain isn't just trading goods anymore. It is producing them on a scale no one else can match. By the middle of the 19th century, half of the world's coal and iron and much of its cloth came from Britain. This is why they called it the workshop of the world. And this workshop needed markets. Where could Britain sell all these goods? To its colonies, of course. India became not just a supplier of raw materials, but a market for British cloth. African colonies sent minerals and received manufactured products in return. This created a cycle. Colonies fueled Britain's factories, and those factories in turn produced goods that flooded colonial markets. It was an economic machine on a global scale. But there's another part of this machine that often goes unnoticed: finance. London became the financial capital of the world in the 1800s. Think of banks financing railroads in Argentina, or mines in South Africa, or canals in Egypt. The City of London was at the heart of these investments. Lloyd's of London insured ships so merchants could take bigger risks. Banks extended credit that tied economies to British capital. And the British pound became the world's reserve currency. In an era before the dollar ruled, it was sterling that shaped global commerce. Almost everything was priced in pounds. That meant Britain didn't just produce and trade, it set the very terms of trade. Now, imagine yourself living in the late 1800s. The sun truly never sets on the British Empire. From Canada to Australia, from India to Africa, Britain's flag flies over countless territories. A quarter of the world's population is ruled from London. The empire produces 1/3 of the world's manufactured goods. At its peak, it is a machine of staggering scale and wealth. But with scale comes strain. Rival powers are emerging: Germany, the United States, Japan. Industrialization is no longer Britain's unique advantage. Other nations are catching up, producing steel, coal, and manufactured goods at competitive prices. Britain still has vast colonies, but it is no longer unrivaled. Now think of the 20th century. The First World War erupts in 1914. Britain is victorious, but at immense cost. Millions are dead, debts are enormous, and for the first time, the United States has emerged as a true financial power. Then, scarcely 2 decades later, another war breaks out, this one even more devastating. The Second World War pushes Britain to its limits. Cities are bombed, industries strained, and the empire, once a source of wealth, becomes a burden to defend. After 1945, the decline is unmistakable. India gains independence in 1947, and other colonies soon follow. The United States and the Soviet Union dominate the post-war world, and Britain finds itself a step behind. The pound loses its dominance, replaced by the dollar. Factories that once led the world face competition from America, Germany, and eventually Asia. The empire that once covered the globe shrinks rapidly. But let's pause here, because the story isn't just about loss. The empire left behind legacies that still shape our world today. Think about it. English became the global language of business and diplomacy. London remains a major financial center. Former colonies, now independent nations, still share connections of law, trade, and culture rooted in the imperial past. Even global systems of shipping, finance, and governance were shaped in large part by Britain's centuries of dominance. So how should we remember it? With admiration? With criticism? With a mix of both? It is impossible to separate the economic achievements from the exploitation that enabled them. The empire built railways, ports, and schools, but it also exploited millions, profited from slavery, and left deep scars in colonized societies. When we say it was the richest empire in history, we must also remember the human cost of that wealth. And maybe that's the lesson. Empires rise, they expand, they dominate, and eventually, they decline. They shape the world, but also leave behind contradictions. Britain rose from a small island to global dominance because of daring explorers, ruthless merchants, brilliant inventors, and powerful financiers. It declined because the world changed, because no nation can forever hold such power, and because the very wealth it created helped others catch up. So next time you sip tea, pay in pounds, or hear English spoken on the other side of the world, remember, you are hearing echoes of an empire that once called itself the richest in history. And as you reflect on that, let me leave you with a question. If the British Empire could rise and fall, what does that tell us about the great powers of today? Could their dominance one day fade as well? History suggests that nothing lasts forever. Thank you for listening to The Economy of Nations. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow and subscribe for more journeys through history's greatest empires and discover how their legacies still shape our world today.